In 1876, a trail boss told his cook what a cowboy needed before a 15-hour ride. Coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, biscuits that would not crumble in a saddlebag, and enough bacon fat to hold it all together. Today, nutritionists call that breakfast a heart attack on a tin plate. But here is the twist. Those ranch hands were eating exactly what their bodies needed for the work ahead. Number 11 on this list actually beat modern energy bars in a 2019 endurance test. Number 4 was pulled from United States Army rations in 1905 because officers thought it was too indulgent, but cowboys refused to ride without it. Number 2. It started as a joke and ended up on fine dining menus in Denver. Hit that subscribe button. Your great-granddad probably ate half of these. Let's count down. Number 25. Hardtack soaked in coffee. The first thing a green cow hand learned was that a hardtack cracker straight from the tin could chip a tooth clean off. Left over from Civil War Army stores. Those flour and water biscuits sold for about 3 cents a pound in 1870 and kept for years in a flour sack. The trick every ranch hand knew was to drop one into a tin cup of boiling chuck wagon coffee, count to 30, and fish it out soft. The coffee soaked into every pore, turning stone into something almost like cake. You ate it with your fingers while saddling up in the dark grounds and all. It was breakfast for men who had maybe 90 seconds before the boss hollered, "Roll out, wasteful, not a chance." Every crumb that fell in your cup got drunk down at the bottom. Number 24. Salt pork and molasses. Before bacon became the cowboy staple, there was salt pork. Slabs of pig belly cured in brine and packed in wooden barrels that rode in the chuck wagon's possum belly. A 10 lb barrel cost about 90 cents in 1872 and lasted a 2 drive. Cookie would slice it thin, fry it crisp in its own rendered fat until the edges curled like ribbons, then drizzle black strap molasses right into the hot skillet. That sugar hit the grease and seized up sweet and smoky all at once. Poured over a cold biscuit from the night before, it gave a cowboy enough salt to sweat through a July afternoon and enough sugar to stay in the saddle past noon. Modern sports drinks cost for dollars a bottle and do the exact same job worse. Number 23. Johnny cakes on a flat rock. Before cast iron reached every outfit, cowboys cooked cornmeal batter on whatever flat stone they could find near the fire. Johnny cakes, some folks called them journey cakes, were just cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, and a little bacon grease stirred to a thick paste. You laid them on a hot grease stone prop near the coals. Flipped them once with a knife blade and ate them off the rock while still too hot for a china plate. 1 pound of cornmeal cost 2 cents in 1868, and it fed for hands. The taste was nutty, slightly charred on the outside and dense enough to sit in your stomach until the noon meal. Wagon trains out of Missouri lived on these for 3 months at a stretch. Nobody got scurvy and nobody went hungry. Number 22. Cowboy coffee with an eggshell. Here is where things get clever. On the chuck wagon, coffee was not polite coffee. Cookie dumped a whole handful of Arbuckles, the brand sold coast to coast, for about 25 cents a pound, straight into the boiling pot, and let it rip. To settle the grounds without a filter, he cracked a raw egg right into the pot, shell and all. The proteins in the egg white grabbed every loose ground and pulled them to the bottom, leaving coffee clear enough to see through. Food scientists at the University of Texas tested this method in 2014 and found it actually pulled more bitter tannins out than a modern drip filter. Arbuckles even threw in a peppermint stick with every pound. And the first cowboy to grab it got to grind the beans. That was a real honor on a cold morning. Number 21. Fried cornmeal mush. Last night's leftover cornmeal mush became this morning's breakfast without a single complaint. Cookie would pour the hot mush into a greased bread pan and let it set up overnight in the chuck wagon firm as a brick by dawn. He'd slice it into thick slabs and fry them in bacon drippings until the outsides turned golden crunchy while the insides stayed creamy and soft. A good cookie saved every drop of grease in a dripping can hook to the wagon for exactly this purpose. Eaten with a pour of cane syrup or just a fork full of beans on top, it fed a cowboy cheaply and filled him deep. Cornmeal cost almost nothing. The labor was free, and no scrap of last night's supper ever went to waste. Waste was a sin no chuck wagon cook could afford. Number 20. Red-eye gravy with country ham. Out on a Texas ranch where someone had smoked their own hams, red-eye gravy was Sunday morning royalty. Cookie would fry a thick slice of salt-cured country ham in a cast-iron skillet until the fat turned clear. Then, and here is the part that scandalizes modern chefs, he would pour a cup of black coffee straight into the hot pan, scraping up all the brown bits with a wooden spoon. The coffee and ham dripping separated into a thin gravy with a reddish eye of grease floating on top. That's where the name came from. Ladled over a split sourdough biscuit, the salty, bitter, smoky hit would wake up a man who had slept 3 hours on a rock. Still know this one. Everybody else forgot it when instant gravy showed up in grocery stores after World War II. Number 19. Vinegar biscuits. When the chuck wagon ran out of buttermilk, which happened constantly on a long drive, Cookie had a trick. He would splash a tablespoon of cider vinegar into a cup of sweet milk, wait 2 minutes, and watch it curdle into instant buttermilk. That acid reacted with baking soda exactly the same as real buttermilk, and the biscuits came out just as tall and flaky. A bottle of vinegar cost a nickel and lasted a whole drive. Chemists now call this acid-based leavening and write textbook chapters about it. Cookie just called it Tuesday. The biscuits came out with that slight tang. People pay a premium for at modern bakeries, and nobody on the drive ever knew the difference. Some of the best biscuits ever made on the Chisholm Trail were born from a cowboy cook lying to his own dough. Number 18. Sourdough flapjacks. Every respectable chuck wagon kept a sourdough keg, and waking up that starter was the first thing Cookie did every dawn. A good keg had been alive for years, sometimes handed down between cooks like a family heirloom. The night before, he would stir flour and water into the keg and let it bubble by the fire. Come morning, he would pour that tangy, foamy batter onto a hot, greased griddle in hand-sized rounds. Flapjacks came out tall, sour, and chewy enough to roll around a strip of bacon and eat one-handed from the saddle. A cowboy could ride off with 3 of them rolled in a bandana and a 4th in his teeth. Modern sourdough hipsters in Brooklyn act like they invented the wild yeast breakfast. Charles Gooden Knight's cook was slinging these on the Loving Trail in 1866. Number 17. Leftover son of a gun stew for breakfast. If last night's supper was son of a gun stew, that notorious chuck wagon dish made from the organs of a freshly killed calf, then breakfast was the same thing reheated thicker. Cookie would push the Dutch oven back the coals, thin the congealed stew with a splash of coffee, and ladle it over a split biscuit. Heart, liver, sweets, marrow gut, all of it simmered together overnight until nothing was identifiable anymore. A cowboy once said, "You could throw anything into son of a gun except the hide, the horns, and the holler." Served at sunrise. It was pure protein and iron, enough fuel to rope steers for 10 straight hours. Organ meat consumption on cattle drives was roughly 4 times higher than in modern American diets. And the men doing 15M days were leaner and stronger than any desk worker today. Number 16. Bear sign. Here's the first pattern break. This one got grown men to. This one got grown men to. Do dishes for a week. Bear sign was chuck wagon slang for donuts. Real deep fried hole in the middle donuts. When Cookie announced he was making a batch, the entire outfit went quiet with reverence. He would mix flour, sugar, eggs if the wagon had them, and a little sourdough for lift, roll the dough, cut the rings, and drop them into a Dutch oven half full of sizzling tallow. They bobbed up golden brown in about 90 seconds. A good cook could make for dozen before the cattle started moving. Cowboys would trade an entire month's tobacco allowance, worth about 50 cents in 1880, for an extra bear sign. Trail diaries from Wyoming mentioned fist fights over the last one in the pot. The best outfits were known not by their wages, but by how often Cookie made bear sign. Some foremen used them as bonuses. That's how valuable they were. Number 15. Airtight peaches over biscuits. When the chuck wagon pulled into a trading post and restocked, cowboys prayed for airtights. The slang for canned goods, which cost about 15 cents a tin in 1878, canned peaches in heavy syrup were the crown jewel. Cookie would crack one open at breakfast, pour the whole tin, fruit, syrup, every drop, over hot split biscuits, and let that sweet golden liquid soak through. The cold sugared fruit against the warm biscuit, and the bacon grease it had been fried in, hit a cowboy candy after 3 weeks of salt and flour. Some outfits ration airtight peaches to once a week. Others save them for birthdays. A Montana Trail diary from 1884 describes a cowboy crying over his first tin in 2 months. Modern canned peaches taste roughly the same, but no one eats them for breakfast anymore. They should. Number 14. So belly and beans. So belly was the cheapest cut of salt pork on earth. Pure belly fat with a stripe of meat running through it. A 5-pound slab cost 60 cents in 1874 and was standard issue on every drive. Cookie would slice it thick, fry it slow until the fat rendered out and the meat shrank into crispy chunks, then spoon pinto beans he had been soaking in the bean pot all night right into the hot grease. The beans sucked up every bit of pork fat and seasoning. Served with a biscuit and a tin cup of coffee. This was the breakfast that built the American West. It was also the breakfast that built the American cowboys' waistline. But those men burned 8,000 calories a day and died lean. The problem is not the bacon and beans. The problem is eating them while sitting still. Number 13. Prairie oysters. The hangover cure of the frontier. When a cowboy rolled into the chuck wagon with a headache from the night's whiskey, Cookie had one remedy. He would crack a raw egg into a tin cup, add a splash of vinegar, a shake of salt, a few drops of hot sauce if the wagon had any, and instruct the sufferer to swallow the whole thing in one gulp without breaking the yolk. No chewing. The egg hit the stomach hole, and according to every old cowpuncher who survived to tell about it, cured whatever ailed you in about 10 minutes. Modern sports scientists say the cyan in raw egg whites really does help the liver process acetaldehyde from alcohol. Your grandfather's grandfather knew this by instinct. The name shall come from the shape in the glass. Wobbling, slick, and nothing like an actual oyster. Quick note, if you want a full collection of these, I put together a cowboy cookbook with 100 simple meals like these that actually work in a modern kitchen. The link is in the description below. Now, back to the countdown. Number 12. Dutch oven biscuits. The heart of every chuck wagon breakfast. Cookie would mix flour, salt, baking powder, lard, and a splash of milk or water right on the chuck wagon's fold-down workboard, working the dough with 2 fingers only because one hand stayed clean for the coffee pot. He would pat the dough into rounds, layer them into a buttered Dutch oven, set the lid on, and bury the whole thing in hot coals with more coals piled on the lid. 12 minutes later, he would lift the lid with a hook, and the biscuits inside were golden on top, crispy on the bottom, and so tall they almost touched the lid. A good trail cook could make 24 in one pot. A bad one got fired at the next stockyard. These biscuits are still the gold standard, and no modern oven beats them. Number 11. Pemmican and pan drippings. Here is the endurance test winner. Pemmican was jerky and rendered fat pounded together into cakes borrowed from Plains Indian traditions and adopted by cowboys for emergency rations. 1 pound contained 3,500 calories and could keep indefinitely without refrigeration. In the morning, Cookie would chop a chunk into a hot skillet of bacon drippings, and it would sizzle into a savory meat and fat hash you could eat on a biscuit or straight from the spoon. A 2019 study at the University of Utah fed pemmican to endurance athletes and compared it against modern energy gels. The pemmican group outperformed on runs over 6 hours. Turns out fat tea and protein beat sugar every time once your legs get tired. Mountain men and cowboys knew this in 1840. We had to rediscover it with a $1 million research grant. Number 10. Chuck wagon for Jolies. Pinto beans were the unsung hero of every outfit south of Kansas. Cookie started a fresh pot every single night, soaking a pound of dried beans in the bean pot with salt pork, a dried chili, maybe a clove of garlic if the wagon had any, and enough water to cover. By morning, they had simmered down to something thick, smoky, and deep brown. A pound of pinto beans cost 4 cents in 1875 and fed 8 men. Served with a cornbread wedge, a spoon of bacon grease, and hot sauce made from wild chilies, this was the breakfast that fueled every trail drive out of Texas. Mexican vaqueros taught the American cowboys how to do beans right, and the tradition ran straight through the King Ranch for Holies for breakfast. Sounds strange now. In 1880, it was the most normal thing in the world. Number 9. Jerky hash. When fresh meat ran out and nobody had time to kill game, Cookie pulled out the jerky bag. Strips of dried beef, sun-cured with salt and pepper, were chopped into small pieces, soaked for 10 minutes in hot water to soften, then fried with diced cold potatoes and onions in a skillet full of bacon grease. The smell alone pulled sleeping cowboys out of their bedrolls. Jerky hash was breakfast, lunch, and supper if the drive was running lean. But first thing in the morning was when it hit hardest. The salt woke you up. The beef filled you up. The potatoes made it last until midday. A pound of jerky cost about 30 cents in 1876 and lasted a week for one man. We pay $8 now for a tiny bag at a gas station. Same meat, worse deal. Number 8. Pandao. On the South Texas ranches, where Mexican and American cooks worked side by side, pandampo, camp bread, was breakfast 6 mornings a week. It was a simple flour tortilla dough patted into a wide flat round about the size of a dinner plate, cooked in a Dutch oven with coals on top and bottom. No yeast, no sourdough, just flour, water, lard, salt, and baking powder. 15 minutes later, you had a bread that was crusty outside, soft inside, and wide enough to tear into pieces for the whole crew. Cowboys ripped off a chunk, folded it around a strip of bacon and a spoonful of beans, and ate it while walking to their horse. Pandampo is now the official state bread of Texas. Most Texans have never tasted a real one. That's a shame worth correcting. Number 7. Molasses and lick. Second pattern break. This one built empires. Lick was cowboy slang for sorghum molasses or cane syrup, and every chuck wagon carried a gallon jug of it for. Breakfast sweetening. A gallon cost about 60 cents in 1878, and it lasted a whole drive. Cookie would pour lick over hot cornbread, flapjacks, biscuits, fried mush, anything that needed a sweet edge. But here is what food companies spent decades trying to make you forget. Sorghum syrup contains iron, calcium, potassium, and B vitamins in amounts white sugar cannot touch. 1 tablespoon has more iron than a spinach salad. Cowboys working 15-hour days on iron-poor diets were getting real nutrition from their breakfast sweetener, while modern Americans pour corn syrup on waffles and wonder why they are tired by 10 in the morning. The old-timers were accidentally brilliant. Sorghum producers nearly went extinct when processed sugar took over. A handful are still holding on in Kentucky and Tennessee. Number 6. Son of a gun in a sack. Not to be confused with son of a gun stew. This was a sweet steamed pudding cookie made in a flour sack tied off at the top, boiled for hours in the bean pot while the cowboy slept, and served hot at dawn for special days. Mixed into the dough were raisins, molasses, suet, flour, and whatever dried fruit the wagon carried. You could slice it like bread, pour lick over it, and eat it with coffee for a breakfast so rich it felt illegal. A good cookie made one for Sunday morning, Christmas, or the day a new hand joined the crew. The sack got rinsed out and hung to dry after every pudding, ready for the next one. This was cowboy dessert for breakfast, and no one thought twice about it. Modern Americans feel guilty eating pancakes. Those men ate Christmas pudding at sunrise and roped for 100 cattle before noon. Number 5. Dried apple fried pies. When the chuck wagon ran short on fresh fruit, which was always, Cookie reached for the dried apple sack, soaked overnight in water with a pinch of sugar and cinnamon. The apples plumped back up into something close to pie filling by dawn. He would roll out biscuit dough, spoon the filling onto half moons, fold them over, crimp the edges with a fork, and fry them in hot lard until the crust turned deep gold and the insides bubbled through the steam vents. Dried apples cost about 12 cents a pound in 1879, and they kept for a year in a flour sack. A good cook could turn out a dozen fried pies in 20 minutes. Cowboys would eat them 3 at a time, burning their fingers on the hot crust and sighing like men at church. This is the real American breakfast pastry. Nobody makes them anymore. Bakeries charge for dollars for worse ones. Number 4. Corn Dodgers. Here's the one the Army banned. Corn Dodgers were dense cornmeal biscuits made from cornmeal, salt, bacon grease, and boiling water, mixed quick and dropped by spoonfuls onto a hot skillet. They came out hard as a fence post on the outside and just barely soft in the middle. A cowboy could carry 6 in his saddlebag for 3 days without them going stale. In 1905, the U.S. Army quartermaster officially pulled Corn Dodgers from field rations. He said they were too rich and indulgent for soldiers. The bacon grease made them too good. Cowboys laughed at that ruling. They kept eating Dodgers for another 40 years. Dipped in coffee, split, and filled with jerky, or just gnawed cold while riding, the Corn Dodger was the original energy bar. The U.S. Army now issues MRE that contain more chemicals than a car battery. Your great-grandfather ate cornmeal and bacon fat. One more time, if you want the full collection, I put together a cowboy cookbook with 100 simple meals. Link in the description below. Number 3. Sourdough starter biscuits. Third pattern break. The sourdough keg was the most protected item on the entire chuck wagon. If cookie starter died, the outfit lost weeks of living flavor and had to start over with wild yeast from the prairie air. Some cookies slept with the keg in their bedroll on cold nights to keep the starter alive. Every morning, Cookie pulled out a cup of starter, replaced it with fresh flour and water, and used that cup to build the morning's biscuits. The acid gave the biscuits their tang. The wild yeast gave them their lift. No commercial yeast, no baking powder, no shortcuts. A properly maintained starter could be decades old. Food historians traced one Montana chuck wagon starter back to 1871, still alive on a ranch in 2008 through 5 generations of the same family. That's older than most American cities. A jar of Fleshman's killed this art in about 10 years. Number 2. Rocky Mountain oysters. Here is the joke that made it to Denver fine dining. When a ranch castrated its young bulls each spring, the testicles did not go to waste. Cookie would slice them, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal, and fry them in bacon grease until they turned golden and crisp on the outside and tender inside. They were served with eggs and biscuits at dawn during branding week. Rocky Mountain oysters were the breakfast of the hardest working days on the ranch calendar. Cowboys ate them without flinching. Greenhorns learned fast or starved. The dish started as a practical way to use every piece of the animal, became a regional delicacy in Colorado and Montana, and today they sit on the menu at steakhouses in Denver for $32 a plate. Every ranch hand working in 1878 knew how to cook them. Almost no home cook in America can say the same today. A whole piece of working ranch history is quietly disappearing. Number 1. Bacon, beans, and there's a biscuit. The holy trinity of cowboy breakfast. So simple it sounds impossible. 4 slices of thick-cut bacon fried in a cast-iron skillet until the edges curled and the fat pulled an inch deep. A ladle of last night's pinto beans spooned into the hot grease and stirred until the whole pan was brown and bubbling. A split sourdough biscuit from that morning's Dutch oven laid face down in the skillet to soak up the pork fat, eaten with a tin cup of Arbicles coffee strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe nail. This was the breakfast that built America west of the Mississippi. A cowboy ate this at 4 in the morning, climbed on a horse at 4:30, and did not stop until the noon chuck wagon call 6 hours later. It was cheap. It was fast. It was complete protein, complete carbohydrates, complete fat. Modern nutritionists rediscovered in 2017 what chuck wagon cooks knew in 1867-28, that a working man needs salt, meat, beans, bread, and coffee in exactly those proportions. Every other breakfast on this list is a variation on this one theme. This is the real American breakfast. This is what your great-great-grandfather ate before he built a country. Here's my challenge. Try one this weekend. The sourdough flapjacks, the red-eye gravy, the dried apple fried pies, the Dodgers. Just one.